Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Gefford. I have a role as the Global Chief Information Security Officer for KPMG. And that sounds like a kind of a big title, but basically what it really means is that I do security for our company, and I sort of do it in global, and we spend a lot of time working with the things I'm going to talk about today. It's trying to thwart threat actors and the activities that they do on the internet on a large scale. So the first thing I do want to do today, though, is to really thank everyone for joining today. It's amazing that sometimes just spending a little bit of time on education can make you much more empowered on the internet. Because some things are they don't seem so intuitive, but when you really start to look at them and go through them, they are really simple, common sense things that can protect you, protect your data, protect your information, your personal information, and really allow you to take advantage of the internet. Because right now, what our statistics we've seen from the Pew Center is about 60%, 67% of people over 65 are out and using the internet. So it's definitely a tool that's being used and really taken advantage of. As people get older and are able to do stuff, whether it's watching stuff, whether it's staying connected with loved ones, doing research, reading. I do think there's a lot of benefits to it, but if you're able to, just take some precautions and do it right, you can really do that without getting yourself into too much trouble. We'll start off with a little bit of a statistic, and I think this one I do like to put out is that, an older adult is like 5 times more likely to be targeted by scammers. It's just, as if you're in the real world. And I'm going to talk a lot today about the things you do in the real world and what you do in the virtual world are almost identical. It's not really different. So just as you see scams and people coming up to you or doing things in the real world, they do it here too. It's not any different, and they'll take advantage of those things as they can. So what we're going to talk about today is some good things that are kind of, I think, hopefully interesting for you, but also will get you comfortable on things. And, maybe too, if you're at a party and, going out to do social things, you'll have some buzzwords you can talk about, hopefully take that away or maybe impress parts of your family. We're going to talk about online scams, start with that. We're going to also talk about these devices that we have and what we can do to protect them. And then we're going to talk about areas of false information. What do you do to stay safe on social media? These are platforms that really do get exploited today. Because why? So the funny thing, why do people exploit the platforms? It's the same thing that they ask robbers, why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. Why do they exploit on these platforms? Because that's where the people are. So it's the same concepts no matter what. We're going to talk about a term that I love. There's always evolving terms called catfishing. What does that mean? Being smartphone savvy. Just how do you make sure you take care of those devices? A little bit about shopping online safely, and then we'll talk a little about cyber attacks. We'll talk about you hear them in the news a lot. Ransomware. If you're any type of news, it's a big thing. I deal with it regularly across the world in what we do. So, we'll talk a little bit about what it means and those things. So as we're doing today, a couple of things that if you're going in here, we're asking questions, just if there's things you want to learn about, please type them in. We can talk about a couple of different topics. Don't hesitate. Don't be ashamed. No questions out of bounds, right? And probably most of the time, if you're thinking of it, somebody else on the line is thinking of the same question. Think about the questions you have about cyber safety and things and other things. If we're not talking about it and you see it, bring it up. And then if you enter them in the chat, we'll make sure we can spend some time and I'll manage it so that, we can answer them all. I really would like to spend as much Q&A as we can at the end. I find that sometimes having a free flow of dialogue is really helpful. We're going to talk first, let's talk about protecting yourself. We started talking about scams, and we're going to say, what are sort of the most common scams out there? The first one you'll see, phishing. You get scammed by phishing. At my firm, we process 3 trillion emails a year. And we probably only allow, of those 3 trillion, About 60,000 of them are related to phishing, and a little bit more. And those are the ones we don't block. So there's a number of things that come through in that essence. So it is a very popular thing to do. And what you always want to be thinking about phishing is, why is this email coming to me? A lot of times too, if you haven't given somebody your address, or you haven't given it to a financial organization or another bank, it's a scam. And you also, one of the things you might be looking at phishing emails, they're usually not very grammatically correct. There's a lot of misspellings. You want to look at the content of it. So what they're just really trying to do is catch you off guard. And so, those are the things that you'll see in a great way. The other thing is tech support scams. This one, I see particularly targeted, that what they'll do is they'll send you an email or say there's something wrong with your computer. You'll get a pop-up on a screen asking you to click and connect and do a safety health check. I'll tell you right now, there's not that many people wanting to do a safety health check on your computer. Anytime you see something like that, just avoid it, clear it out, do those types of things. Only if you've asked for it. Government impersonation scams. This one I find it is very popular. And why is it popular? The IRS is sending you a notification about something that you have overdue taxes. Let me be very frank. My brother works for the IRS. I've talked to the IRS. The IRS does not send emails. They will not send emails. They will send you letter upon letter upon letter, but they will, in the postal service, but they will never send an email. So if you get one of those, please do not open the file associated. Do not click on the link. There's a lot of times, and unless you have a direct interaction with someone in the government on a phone, or they're doing it, don't do that. The other thing too is, if you do get something from an agency, pick up the phone, call them. That's the best way to do these types of things. Because sometimes we find the government wants to get more, connected and connect these things. So you do see something like that, just pick up the phone, call the agency, get to the person. If they're not there, then you'll really realize that it is a scam. The next one that we talk is financial scams. People will always ask for money, and they'll kind of ask you for that, or, the joke that we always had, there's a lot of Nigerian princes who are trying to get money out of Nigeria. All that's a very famous one on the internet, but they're asking for cash, all these types. So it's a very common scam that you'll find out there. Bogus lottery competitions. You've won this, you've won a prize, you've been selected. And these also not only come in emails, but they also come in text now. So if you're on your mobile phone, you'll get these texts. If you don't know who the text is from, they're telling you won a prize, or they say, congratulations, you just paid your bill, and click here for a discount on something. Those texts are bogus. Delete them, get rid of them, don't respond to them. Okay. The other one that we talk, a lot of romance scams. There are always ones where people are looking to have a romantic relationship, to get to know stuff, to do those types of things. You'll see this particularly targeted towards older adults, that type of area where, if you're on Facebook or things, they get those lists and they do that. This is a very common scam. The one here too are also fraudulent websites. We'll talk a little bit about how to look at a bad website in those areas, but we'll talk a little later, is always go to sites that are known and reputable for the data they have, or you go to government sites, or you go to, whether it's your doctor or healthcare, always try to go those. There's a lot of sites out there. We said this in one of our yesterday's session, every day about 30,000 websites get hacked. And they're also very easy to stand up. In my role, we chase a number of fraudulent sites. We probably chase on an average of probably 200,000 fraudulent sites a day, because they just pop up, go down, pop up. And we call these command and control sites. They're usually done for malicious acts. So you always want to be making sure you're looking at them reputable going on in those sites. A good one I always talk about too, they're usually not very well secured. So one good key indicator is you look on top of the bar, And if you don't see the lockup there and it'll say HTTPS, probably a fraudulent site. Okay. And if you do see one that doesn't have it, I don't exchange any information with it, even if it is a legitimate site, because it's not encrypted or safe. The last one here we talked about too is these idea of personal emergency scams. Someone says, I need your help and we need it now, or something's going to happen, or somebody's going to be there. This is another form of those types of scams. So as we kind of look at these things, again, tech support, government, financial, romantic, personal emergencies, all of these ones are things just to be thinking about from your email. And also, again, I'm going to reinforce this thinking about from text. I'm amazed the number of phishing text or scam text that I get. And there's ways to go out, and we'll talk about here now. So what do you do to try to help protect yourself, or even more, what do we do to even better define what these scams are? Here's the first one I think is good. When you talk about those romantic ones, they'll always start the conversation first with you. They'll say, hey, how are you? Hey, what are you doing? Where's going on? Or, I would look for something. So when somebody's starting a conversation with you, always be a little bit weary of that. When I grew up, I was making a joke again yesterday. I grew up in a town where the elevation was higher than the population, and we knew strangers. And my parents always said, first thing, don't talk to strangers. The same thing applies here. If someone's talking to you, don't talk to strangers. The second one is that they claim they work for a popular company. If they claim they work for a popular company, the thing you do is you call that popular company and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you. If they're not there, it's not them. Okay, and you really block these people, you do those things. As I said earlier, the messages contain typos, poor grammatical error. And these are and that's pretty common that you'll see. You rarely see, for some reason, when they send these out, they send big ones, you don't really get through that process too much, and you'll see this area. They'll request personal information. I think this one's a big one for me, is they're always looking for, hey, can you send me this or send me that name, just give me something. So always be wary of people asking for personal information. They share very long and unclear links. So they'll say, hey, could you click on here to help me with something? And there'll be a lot of text going across. Most links that you get sent are very short, and they'll usually end in a .com or whatever that is. So they're sending very long links in a mail and a message. They'll avoid to redirect you to a manager. So I think the other thing too, when people are saying, you're feeling uncomfortable, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right, ask for a manager. Say, I'd like to speak to your manager, especially if they're calling you as well. That kind of piece, or they'll do that. So if they won't redirect you, it's most likely a scam. Okay. And they call with a need for urgent action. It's like high pressure sales. When think about, if you're ever you used to buy a car, and there's always that pressure because they want to close the deal and do that. The same thing happens here. They want you to do something quickly. You never have to do anything quickly on the internet. Okay. And you should always stop, pause, think, and say, so let me think about it, and you can go away. So, and the last one too here, they ask for money. It's always an important thing that they'll want from you. Ask for money, do that. And the other thing here that I'll always say, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Just as you find in the real world, someone's got a deal for you, you walk up and you say, wow, that's not too good to be true. Same rules apply here. It's never, something there. Okay, so I like to talk about having your own, your personal skepticism. If it doesn't smell right, it doesn't feel right, it's not right. And delete that and sort of walk away from it. So these are really important things that even I do, and we teach our own staff. And I have to do this a lot of times with our staff. We'll have people calling them all the time asking for information, doing that. So we constantly train everybody. So I don't always want you to think that this is just personally attacked at older adults. They do this in companies and everything else. It's called social engineering is what the effort is. Okay, so it doesn't discriminate in those cases. So what do we do to avoid these scams? Verify if the call or email is legitimate. Go back, take a look at that. you look at the company, see if they're part of the company, do those things. Or you do ignore the email or the phone call. You get a lot of robocalls these days. If everybody, and you can try to block that, but I'll tell you this, the scammers have a great way of moving past that, even if you block them. So just if they're calling, say no, thank you, and appreciate your time, and move on. And block the email or address on your phone. I personally have about 200 numbers blocked on my phone. I have an app from AT&T that I use that actually, I can block it as a fraudulent caller, or dialing that they do. So I highly encourage that you can do that. Again, never share your personal information, never share your address, never share your birth date, names, all those types of things. Always stay away from it. Be careful what you post. Facebook or Twitter and Instagram, they're great ways to share things and do those pieces. But always think, is it worth posting? And I'll say this a couple times through here. Think twice, post once. Because when something goes to the internet, it stays on the internet, and the internet isn't private. There is a lot of ways to connect it, and data is out there, all the time. Think before you click. So just like we said, think twice before you post. I always say think twice before you click on something. I have a great way of deleting a lot of. I probably delete a majority of the emails that I get a lot of times, just because I don't know where they are. I don't know where they're coming from. And there's ones, if people really want to send me an email, they will. And preferably as well as my business, if it's that important and I delete it, they'll send it to me again. So always think about it, because what they put in there are the links, or they put attachments, and the attachments are usually where you'll find the viruses or the malware and things that will launch if you open them. And we'll talk about what those are a little bit later in the training. But most of all, right, I think one of the things here, be cautious with what you share. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to try to be friendly. They're going to do those things. I always try to say, ask them more questions, or simply just hang up. There's no reason here to be courteous. You don't have to be. It's a scam. Just say thank you, hang up, and move on with your day. I think it's really an important thing. And the other thing too here, we always want to try to, if you can, take the opportunity, if you're willing, report abuse that happens. And there's several ways you can do it. If you do get involved in a scam, I always encourage that and you lose money or something happens, file a police report. You can do that here in Montgomery County. And you don't have to go to them. There's actually a line, an officer will call you. They'll take down your data, they'll file a police report. And it's not so much that they can catch the crooks, it's just in case you want to use it for your insurance or you need it for something else to go along the way. I always recommend that. Or even if it happens on one of the platforms you're on, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, there are ways to report abuse and do that. So I do encourage you to do that, because it not only protects you, but it protects other people as well. Okay. Protecting your devices. This one, again, I love mobile devices. I love my iPad. It's been great to be able to. I like to read on those. I like to draw. I like to be creative. I like to watch Netflix, all those things that I'm able to do. So I do, but I also make sure that I do protect my devices. And we'll talk here about what are just a couple of core things you do to protect your devices. Number one, use strong passwords. Don't use birth dates. Don't use street addresses. Don't use a wedding date, a grandchild's name, a nephew's name, your son or daughter's name. Those are really important things to stay away from. And we want to make sure that we have a length, minimum of 8 characters at a minimum, but you should use both uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. And the reason we do that and say that is to crack a password where you add an uppercase, lowercase, and a special character is much, much harder. We can crack a password if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. my team can probably crack that password in less than 6 seconds, even if we don't even know what it is. It's because we can run through algorithms of password and try them. But when you go to something where it's multi-character and do that, that takes it is an exponential increase in permutations to do that. So it's just much harder to crack. The next one we talk about, install antivirus. It's really important these days. You'll see Semantic or McAfee running antivirus. Also has where it runs for malware and viruses, and I think that's a great thing. You've got to keep it up to date and running it. It's just a baseline protection. It's like you buy insurance for your home, you should always buy antivirus for your devices. It's just that common thing that we should do. Never skip an update. And what does that mean? A lot of times on your devices now, we're finding that something called zero-day vulnerabilities, or they find issues. There's a lot of them out there. And we just want to make sure that, the vendors are trying their best, whether it's Apple, whether it's Microsoft, they'll always continue to send updates. Do the updates when they come out, and regularly look for those updates, because a lot of times they're coming out fast because there's a security issue they're trying to address. So please, I'm going to encourage you to continue to do that. Keep them up to date. Use current operating systems as well. Secure your router. A lot of times, what happens, people they'll get a router, they'll put it out of the box. They'll use the password is admin. Any good hacker knows they always try admin first, because if people don't change that out of the box password, you go right in. So, with your router, you want to make sure you hide sort of the device where it talks about what your network is. You want to make sure that it doesn't go too far, or you put the right security on it and those encryptions. We'll talk a little bit later about how to try to get help for those types of things, but you always want to protect your router in the house these days. Consider a virtual private network connection, or a VPN. This one's a little bit more sophisticated. I use VPNs a lot of time, particularly when before COVID, I used to travel a lot around the world in different places. And so I would use something that's called a virtual private network. What it does is it protects your traffic, it protects your device going out. But if you're interested in doing that, I would recommend getting some help to run that. Nord's a great one that I use around the world in different places, but it does protect your device, it protects your IP address in doing that. A good thing I'm going to talk about here, if you get into something where a ransomware attack comes in and it encrypts your hard drive or does something, or you get a virus that destroys your hard drive, you always want to try to get your data back. And one of the things that I do recommend is finding a way to back up your files and back up your data somewhere, and try to do that on a periodic basis. Why is that? Because if that happens or your laptop crashes, you can simply basically have it reinstalled and put your data back on that. And it doesn't, even if the system itself goes down, there's a way to clean it and come back, and you don't lose your data. Keeping it separate sometimes is very helpful. Okay. The other thing we want is to go and look at your personal security settings. All of our devices have ways of turning things off, of not allowing connections. These are things you want to investigate and go back and turn some of them on and not. And so that's one that if you go in, particularly with Apple, or you go in iOS, you just go into, say, certain settings where you'll turn off Bluetooth or you'll turn off unwanted connections. That's very helpful in the things that you're going to do. But let's talk about now, we've kind of come from the scams that are working with you and hitting you to talking about the devices themselves. What do you want to do when you're really online? And I love this one. I love this part of our training because it's always interesting for me to talk about how do you look at to identify sort of false or misleading information out there. And I'll usually come back, and we do this as a thing. We'll ask people to pick it out, but I'll give you a couple of hints when you look at something like this. When we always look for false, misleading information, the first thing is it's an outlandish type of thing. So a man captures raccoon riding on an alligator. That's normally not going to happen. So what they try to do is to get you to look at it. The second thing that you try to look at here is you try to look for the dates. When you see a date here of June 16, 2015, and it's, January 2022, that's a good indicator that it's false information, false news. And the other piece about this, you tend not to see an author of it. Most legitimate journalists and things that are going on want to get their byline. So you don't see an author here or something like that. It usually means that it's been put up by something where it's false or it's misleading. Not every time, but most of the time, because they always want credit. And then a lot of times too, what you'll see something like this is a picture that's photoshopped. It may not look like this, but 9 times out of 10 or 9 times out of 100, you're not going to see a raccoon standing on an alligator somewhere. Usually it's going to be eaten by the if it's in that section, but it won't be standing on there getting a ride. So these are things that I try to get you to look at when you're looking at these different sites, and there's some easy ways to spot it. So try to do this when you look at, just fact check and look at political information in your news. There's just so many sites out there that come up and come down. Anybody can stand up a website, and you can stand it up in 5 minutes and say anything you want. The thing that we want to talk about, particularly with yourselves, is looking for your health information. Try to go to trusted sources. Go to things, you go to like a WebMD, or you go to the Mayo Clinic, or you go to the CDC, World Health Organization. Go to those types of organizations to really work and get your information. There's just a lot of other places that have false information. And more importantly, one of the things that we talk about here too is always work with your official government sites. There are things around the IRS that you go to, and it's always.gov, or you go to Montgomery County. Those are the things that I highly recommend when you want to deal with taxes, retirement, Social Security, and all those types of things. So I wouldn't go to any other site telling them you can do something about that. So the good thing about social media is it's such a great way to connect people sometimes, but the downside is that it also has its pitfalls. And one of the things we'll always start talking about here, and again, you'll hear me say this time and time again, almost like I'm a repeating record, is think twice before you post or respond. Do you really want to engage with the person? Do you really want to post personal information? Do you want to post a picture that has your house and your street address and the things you're doing? Is it something you really want to put up there? So just take a moment, pause before you push. And I personally, I put this in my daily business life, all of my emails have a 2-minute delay on them. So I always do that, because if I wrote something and maybe I wrote it in haste, or I wrote it in anger, or I wrote it, and I wasn't thinking, I always have a delay. And I'll tell you that has saved me so many times. I'll go back into my box and I'll get it. It hasn't gone out, and I'll reread it and I'll do something. So I always talk about that. It's a good thing for me, and it's always something I ask people to think about. Look at your default privacy settings. A lot of times now on the platforms, you can make sure that only friends or contacts are able to see your information, not everybody. The default setting is everyone. It's everyone. So you just want to make sure you go into those settings and make sure you're down to your family and friends necessary. My quote that I often tell this to the teenagers and kids about this, and it's the same thing I'll tell everybody else. The rules apply the same way. Once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet. A lot of kids today, they'll post pictures and things, and believe it or not, employers go and look at sites like this, and they look at what people are doing. The same thing is here. If you don't want a picture of something on the internet, it's very hard to take it down. And it'll always be out there somewhere. So if you don't want it there, don't post it. Okay. And finally, the thing I'll be here is log out every time you're done. Never just close it down. Log out, because what it does is it cuts the session, and then somebody who has to try to do there has to log back in. And particularly if you use a strong password, they'll have to go out logging it in. So every time you do something, log out if you do that. The other thing too that I'll make a mention here is also with your devices. It's good to log out of your devices all the, on a periodic basis, but also shut them down because it takes time for reboot, the cache cleans, and it looks for it looks for updates as well. So I do recommend that you just don't leave your devices on all the time. Shut them down so that they reboot. They clean the cache as well, which is really important. We're going to talk about my new favorite term. So there's a lot of terms that I use. One's called phishing. There's another one that's called spear phishing, where it's a target attack. We call whaling. Whaling is where you go after executives of companies and those types of things. But the one that we're going to talk about here is called catfishing. And really what catfishing is, it's a bit of a deceptive activity where people create personal, personas or fictional personas and identities online that they make up about themselves, because what they really want to do is to do financial gain. They want to compromise something, and they're targeting you. So they'll say, hey, you look like you do these things, or they'll do a profile on you, and they'll say, hey, I do this, or I like that too, or these things I have in common, or we do that. And they'll make that so that they can come up and connect with you. Remember we talked about earlier about the scams. They'll contact you always first, right? And it's a key indicator of a scam. So what we want to be thinking about is, well, how do you spot this? How do you spot these things in cat? Or what can you do when you spot phishing? And one, we talked about the person actually refuses to meet you in person, right? So that's usually an idea of catfishing, because they don't ever really want to do that. They just want to either get data from you, or they want to get stuff, so they refuse to meet. The second thing is they have no real or they have minimal social media presence. So they'll come at it like they've set up this fake persona, but when you go to look them up on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever it is, these Instagram, you really won't see a presence about them. So again, they refuse to meet. You won't see much presence on social media. They'll claim love quickly. They'll affection, or what it is. Hey, God, it's so great. We're so connected. I can't believe I've met someone like you. They use all these kind of tactics to kind of come in. And then again, you'll see a common theme here. They'll ask for money. A lot of these scams are related to getting people to give bank accounts over, to give debit cards over, pay for these types of things. Is a really big motivation here. And when you look at this individual who's doing this too, if the picture seems too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. Again, these common things that we use in everyday life are very applicable in the virtual world. And then the last thing, this is always a big one for me. They're always traveling or living overseas. They can't meet, and they do that, and there's always this excuse where they're somewhere else. So, these are some ones that we try to use to when we teach people and work with them, that this is what you're going to see in a great way to say, how can you spot what's going on with catfishing? Okay. And then here's a good one here. So we're going to shift a little bit into talking about shopping online safely. What's the great thing about shopping online, particularly with COVID, is you're able to get things and delivered to your door where you didn't have to have any human contact, and so it's really good. So a couple of 4 things I want you to be working on is make purchases through legitimate sites only. If you go to Giant Online, you'll see the connect up there, know where it is. You go to Amazon, you go to, these type of purchasing sites. That's what you want to really be focusing on. Okay. This one is, I know some people are uncomfortable, but I highly recommend this, and I do this. I have one credit card that I use to make purchases online. Okay, and why do I do that? Because there's a limitation of liability for me. The worst that can happen to me is I'm liable for $50 if the credit card is bogus, or someone steals the credit card or does something with that. If you use your debit card, they have access into your bank account, and they will go and wipe your bank account out. Okay, So use one credit card, use it all the time. You're able to look at those transactions, and I highly recommend that. Never save your payment details. I'll always ask you, do you want to save the credit card? I don't recommend doing that. Browsers can be exploited, things are going on. Always have your credit card with you and then type it in and don't save it. It's a very good practice. And finally, use secure Wi-Fi connections when buying anything. I know sometimes people sit in the Starbucks and you're there and you're working on some stuff. Don't buy things from the Starbucks. Wait till you go home. Save it that you want to buy it. When you buy it, go to some of that secure that you know. Those are open. Those are just, you're in an airport, people do this, or you go and you're in Starbucks, or you're somewhere where you get free Wi-Fi. Just resist the urge. Wait till you get to a place that you know it's secure, and then use that. Most of those times, other people can be on there. They hack into that. They can collect details and going. So these are things that I just talk about. It's just better to be safe than sorry. Okay. This one again here, we're gonna come back and talk about being smartphone savvy. So now that you got your smartphone, and I love these days smartphones. I remember when I got my first phone, it was probably this big, this fat, and it weighed like a pound, and I could only see some monochrome stuff on it. But today, I really enjoy what you can do. You can read, you can do apps, you can text, you can do a lot of things. And although some part of my family probably say I spend too much time on my phone, which isn't a good thing either. That is a bit of another issue, but we'll talk about that in a separate class. But here we want to talk about only download reputable apps, and how do you kind of do that? If you're on an Apple phone, go to the iTunes store to do that, and go to the App Store. Sometimes downing apps from sites isn't always a good idea. I say go to the sites there. You go to Google, or you go to the Android site, just because those are places where they're testing. You have to go through some rigor to get on there. If you also want to look at something that's reputable, particularly even if it's in the store itself, like in the iTunes store, you can tell a couple of ways how bad an app is by the number of times it's been downloaded. If it's only been downloaded like 10 times, or less than 100 or 50 times, it's usually not a good app. You want to see if an app's been downloaded in the thousands of times of what they're doing, it's more legitimate. So, in times of things, that's always something to be looked at. When onesie twosies, it's not usually one that you want to play with too much. Be careful with the app permissions. They'll, a lot of times they'll ask you to sign up, and they'll ask for access to your calendar, access to your contacts, access to things. Always try to make sure you can go in and modify what the app actually can have access to. I think that's really important these days. It's a quick thing that they try to do once it loads and goes. Just be mindful of what you allow it to do. If you can, in working through stuff, apps are about tracking people, and they always want to walk where you're going, what you're doing, where you're buying. Learn how to turn off location and GPS where you are. I'm a big fan of that, just because of certain apps are really tracking what you're doing and where you're going, where you buy things, and that's just a big deal for me. Turn off that, turn off GPS. If you need it when you're trying and you're lost somewhere, and again, turn it back on, but turn it off again. Keep it safe means don't hand it to other people. Don't give away your passcode. Keep it with yourself all the time. People like to set down their phone and walk away. I recommend not doing that. Keep it up to date. We talked earlier about keeping through the updates and making that happen is really, really an important area these days. Bluetooth is one to be careful with as well. I highly recommend when you're going out, unless you're using it to connect to an earphone or something else, turn off Bluetooth. Years ago, Bluetooth was really hard to use to connect. To do these days, it is very good, and it can connect to a lot of things, and you'll find hackers wanting to do that. One of the tools that we use as a hacking tool and looking at things is that I'll turn on my iPhone a GPS scanner or a Bluetooth scanner, and I can pick up Bluetooth devices within probably 150 yards to 200 yards of where I'm sitting, all connecting in, and that's pretty powerful. So what you just want to make sure is you're just turning that off and not making it available, and then connect carefully. When you look at the app and you're going on your phone, going with free Wi-Fi, free is free sometimes. So it's, always turn off the Wi-Fi unless you're really connecting to it. Starbucks isn't bad to go when you're looking at news and looking at that stuff too. We talk about them buying stuff, but just be careful what you're connecting to and where it is. The last area here that I'm going to really, drive into is talking about, some of the cyber attacks and things that are going on. And it's just to help you relate just a little bit to what's going on in the world. One of the key things you'll hear is a virus. And a virus is no different than, and then I hate to say, but the COVID virus that's out there right now. It's designed to go out and spread from device to device. And sometimes it actually has an ability to self-copy itself and move forward. We deal with viruses, every day. There's millions of them out there. Some of them we know, some of them are actually unknown malware. A form of sort of that's virus-like is something called a worm. The difference between a virus and a worm is a worm actually sort of automatically spreads. It will just go from computer to computer. Once it sets off, it goes and it just finds every path to get there. A virus tends to need some help in what it's doing. It'll come in a link, or it'll come in an attachment type of a thing. So it takes a little bit of intervention to help. So it needs a host to jump from that, from computer to computer. So you'll continue to hear that. The one that we talked about earlier with your smartphones and going to sites is spyware. And what happens sometimes when you download an app or you download a document from the internet, a site, it will actually download spyware, which is it's on your computer in the background, and it's really transferring data back out unknowing to you. So from time to time that does happen. And the other issue you'll see a click on is a thing called adware. And applications that will go into the automatically download. They'll start bringing adware pop-ups and that type of stuff. This is another thing that sort of happens. It usually happens a lot of times too with free apps and the things that you're seeing. So these are ways that they're happening in the background and just sending information. Their whole thing is to just get you to click on more things or to send more data about what's on your endpoint. Spywares are usually trying to take data to understand what you have, personal information and those different areas. The other one that I just always want to be talking about here is this idea of ransomware. Ransomware is exactly what it means. It's no different than when someone takes a hostage in the real world and says, you need to pay a ransom to get it back. Same thing here. They just use encryption to do it. So this malware will land on your laptop. It'll start encrypting your hard drive, and then it'll pop up with a message saying, you need to pay me in so much Bitcoin. And if they do that, we'll give you the key to unlock your ransomware. And it'll be anything from a half of a Bitcoin to 10 Bitcoins to that. So, that's what you'll start to see happening in a ransomware. Again, one of the best ways you can thwart ransomware is have your data backed up somewhere else. So all you do is you just break down the operating system and you'll get a new one and it starts all over again. That's one of the key ways to thwart a ransomware attacks. The other way to do that is just not click on those links. And when somebody sends that to you as part of a phishing email. The one that we also put in here, which is interesting, is called a DDoS attack. We talk about this sometimes, and what it really means is a distributed denial of service attack. So, when we don't have routers at home that are appropriately, configured in doing that, what really an attacker will do is they'll just send a lot of data all at once, and they'll flood, you'll flood your connection of what they're doing. And it's the equivalent of if you ever see you ever see a small pipe of water going into it, If it's this size of pipe and that much water, for it to go into it, it just starts filling up because the volume can't move through fast enough. And the same concept here, they realize you only have so much bandwidth to do it, and they just flood more data and more data, more data, more data, till it basically, it can't get through. So this type of thing we see, and so when you see things around your router, or you see some sites coming down, that might be one of the areas just to be thinking about. It's not very common though in it's more common in commercial entities versus people and private entities. Couple core things about how do you detect an attack of something like this. Number one, you're seeing unusual, mysterious emails. Again, they're misspelled, they're grammatically wrong on certain things. They look like they were just botched and paper cut together. Messages about your password being changed. This is an important one. They'll say, hey, we need you to change your password. Click on this link and enter a new password and for what you're doing. That is, unless you have gone and done that from a company, we normally wouldn't send you out something telling you to reset your password, unless you've taken an active way to do that. It'll tell you you're being locked out of an account or a device. So, sometimes what you'll see, if it's been attacked, it'll actually reset the password on you. So if you get locked out and so many times, or the device itself is happening, that is probably an indicator of what's going on. The suspicious or unusual pop-ups. This is one where particularly all of a sudden you're working and all of a sudden a pop-up says, hey, click on this link. That's always a good sign that you're being attacked on something as well. Another area that we talk about this in pop-ups, sometimes when you're on websites, something called clickbait, where they'll tell you some crazy fact, or they'll want you to do something, and their whole reason is to get you to click on it. And that's a sign of attack that we see on websites. And what that really does for you is they just want you to click on it so that they'll pop up something, but in the meantime, they'll download, we talked about spyware, or they'll download malware that will be, something that's not good for you. Your connection slow down. Normal, then in the normal, it means that data must be maybe moving out of it and what's going on. So if you're experiencing that normally slow connections, the website doesn't come up, it takes long to get email, maybe an indication that you have an attack going on. So those are things just to always keep in the back of your mind, in terms of where you are. But let's talk about some things that you can do to protect this. And there are, and these simple things really work well, okay? Strong passwords. The thing about hackers and attackers, they're like electricity. They go to the path of least resistance. They, they don't want to continue to pound at something all the time. So that's why we say strong passwords, because if it takes too long to crack it, they move on to the next victim. They move on to the next scam. Most hackers and attackers have very short attention spans. So this is a tactic to kind of have to annoy them and let them move on. The other is also just be aware of unfamiliar apps that you download, or unusual messages and pop-ups. I'm very happy with a lot of our executive team. They'll call me quickly all the time because of the whaling issue. If they find an email or something happens, they get sent something, and we'll quickly work with them. I'm very happy that they're responsive and very looking at it all the time. So just be mindful when you're working on the stuff you're doing. Use secured network for Wi-Fi. Again, sometimes if you're at the Starbucks, you can't help it, or you're there. That's one thing, but always try to use secure, because again, you're not likely to have attackers sitting on that or putting attacks on it. So these are these couple of core areas there. And this last one or so that we're going to look at, we have one more after this, but keeping your software up to date, because it thwarts attacks. That's why they're giving you the updated software. And then finally, here is, I went back to this piece, is so security and antivirus features. I can't do enough. I can't advocate enough having antivirus. So, these aren't really crazy technical things. And believe it or not, this really helps. It helps a lot. Passwords, Don't click on it. Use secure networks, keeping your software up to date, and having antivirus. These 5 simple things will really go a long, long way. Okay. We always want to talk about what do you do when you recover from an attack. Change your passwords. I highly recommend changing your passwords periodically, just because. I also recommend that as soon as if you think anything has been compromised, change your password. It's better to be safe than sorry. The effort it takes to change a password can save you a lifetime of pain. Okay. Try to determine what's been lost or compromised. So did you lose some tax records? Did you lose financial information, your banking information? Always just try to figure out what that was. Notify your contacts. Okay. Why is that important? What the attackers are trying to do is they're trying to collect your information and your contacts. So what they'll do is they'll actually send an email saying it's you, or they'll use your account to do that. So the contact then becomes part of the attack and becomes a victim as well. And this just doesn't happen to all of you. We see very sophisticated attacks that come against our organization, where they attack one of our clients, or they attack one of our suppliers, and they compromise their email, and they actually send our emails back to us. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack. And so what they'll do is it'll come back to us looking like it's a legitimate email. So that's why you just want to make sure you notify your contacts so they can be aware of it. Follow your antivirus recovery steps. So when you do have attack, run your antivirus and let it go through and scan through. A lot of them now actually not only search for viruses, but they search for malware. And so if they quarantine something, then they say do something about it, do that, right? Follow whatever attacks come out from after that. Contact your bank and let them know something's happened. They're usually very good about getting you a new account or getting you a new credit card. Just making sure they're watching it, putting a hold on things. It's better to be safe than sorry. Sometimes on apps these days too, you can actually lock your account if you go for the banking thing. So, that's important as well. And finally, to report it to the police. And again, it's not that they can always do something about it and getting it, but it just helps you when you go to your insurer or you go back to your bank and say, hey, I reported this, and you get a police report to do that. Believe it or not, I was actually a victim of check fraud back in October. I had mailed my first check in 5 years. And it actually got intercepted in a mailbox, and it was a $500 check that somebody cashed for $26,000. So I went to my bank and I filed a police report, and I worked with them. And partially too, the police also want to know about that type of stuff, because there's this particular case from a mail perspective that, if it's in a mailbox that's here, we have people breaking into mailboxes or do something. They just want to be aware of those types of things. So it also helps other people in the future by contacting the police. So when you think about it, it's not just helping you, it's paying it forward and sort of helping others. And like I said to you, you can go to the site. It doesn't mean you have to go to the Montgomery County Police Station and sit down and talk to them. They'll call you back and they'll do the interview. They file it, and you can pick it up online. It's very easy. Okay. So what I want to talk about here is building cyber trust. Even being in technology and security for 20 plus years, going on to 30 years now, I don't know everything I need to know, and I myself ask for help. I have a lot of people around me. I have a contact. So what I'm going to really encourage you to do is, ask for help. I think it's important to do that. But these are some really important things. Take action, trust your instincts. Everything that you've learned in life and going along the way applies here. Again, I said, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right, okay? Your instincts to slow down and something's going on, slow down. It's really important. Also don't be ashamed or embarrassed. We find a lot of times people think that they should know stuff about computers and do this. It's not. It's a sophisticated world out there. I watch very educated, well-tuned people become susceptible to scams. They're very good at what they do. So there's nothing wrong with that. The worst thing you can do is not try to do something about it. And that's sort of my thought process. The other thing that I encourage you, and you were all doing the first step today. So again, I want to thank you. You make my job easier, because if you're cyber safe, the hackers have less to go at, and we try to put them out of business. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And educating yourself. And this is the first step on that. So I kind of recommend a couple of things. One is, tech savvy, someone in your family member or your friend group who's very tech savvy, they can help you out. There are also great YouTube. If you watch YouTube, there's so many good YouTube videos that you can watch. I spend a lot of time watching myself YouTube videos if I want to study something and learn it. So training courses and that and YouTube videos are great. Or get an IT expert from a reputable company. Sometimes with the Geek Squad that are out there, call friends, recommend them. And talk to somebody. One of the core things about I'm in the cybersecurity industry. We also have a commitment. I'm a certified information security professional, and part of it is we're committed is that we have to train in the industry. So there's our people out there. A couple of things that Quinn will send on to you is actually from ISC Squared. Which is the group that does certifications for people like myself, and they will definitely connect you with mentors. There's a cyber safety program in there too. Please feel free to connect that, and we'll find that as well. And put you here. I'm always around too. Quinn can help get you connected with me, and that's what I try to do. I'm always happy to be of help. So with that being said, that's more of the formal stuff. We can walk into questions that you have, and I'm willing to answer anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a number of questions that have been patiently typed in the chat box. But before we do that, I just want to make sure, Charlotte, your hand is raised. So I just want to, we'll probably just go back to Charlotte because I think that might be a mistake. So the first question that was typed into our chat box is by Betsy. And she asks, I've been told that Apple computers do not need to have a security program, that they have been built in. Is this correct?
So in Apple, if we're talking about a Mac, that's not correct, actually. I run antivirus. It used to be years ago, Apple was more secure than Windows, and they would go back and forth. We're finding more and more Linux is the operating system that supports underneath Apple. There's viruses that are going in on that. So even if you have a Mac, I run Integro on my Mac. I have a Mac over here, and I have a Windows over here and a server over here. So I highly recommend that you do get some type of antivirus scanning, on those types of things. We do find that it's not so much for the iPhone or for the Apple you need it, but for a Macintosh, I do recommend that.
Great, thank you, Brian. That actually was a question that was asked of us yesterday in the parent session too. So it's good to repeat that for this group.
Yeah, to be frank, today nobody's safe. There's just so many. I often say when I look at the dark web and the hacking community, if I could channel all that energy for good, we would solve world hunger and poverty and most other issues.
Agreed. Deborah asks, by choice, I do not have a cell phone, but I do have a landline phone and a desktop computer. Calls I get on the phone include a message that so much money has been charged to my Amazon account. I know that's fraud because I don't have an Amazon account and I don't buy anything online. I assume I should just hang up when I get a call like that. I've also gotten a call announcing I won Publishers Clearinghouse, but I never entered. Again, should I just hang up?
Yes, hang up. unless you're kind of like me or one of my colleagues that they like to play with the people for a while and they ask them all kind of questions. They ask them their name and they ask them, how's it going? Where are you at? What you doing? If you're in that kind of mood, can do that. But 99 times out of 10, yeah, just hang up. It's not worth your time and your energy.
Just hang up. Okay.
Just hang up. If you get the phishing email, my favorite button is delete.
Delete. Good. Susan asks, what is the AT&T app that you use to block calls? How does this compare to No Robo?
Oh, okay. So a lot of times on the one I think you're referring to on the Noma Robo is the at least I know I use that for landlines. That's the one where I try to block robocalls on my landlines from that perspective. So that I see them doing that. The one, and I'll do it right now. I'll actually pick up the app for you. If I can remember it off the top of my head, it's actually called for AT&T. It's called Mobile Security. And it's something of Active Armory. You can get it from that, and it's an app that actually does a couple of different things. It does Wi-Fi security. It'll help you with the apps on that side. But the one that you would probably want to look at, this is the one. So that's one that AT&T does for protecting your phone. The one that you want to hear for AT&T around the call is called Call Protect. And what Call Protect does is it logs all of your calls and it'll tell you which ones that they're known spammers and which ones are there, and then you can also tag them. So the app is called Call Protect from AT&T. I'm sure Verizon has one, T-Mobile has one as well. This is an issue for them. If you get text, there is a way to block people on the text as well. So when you get that you won the Clearing of Public House sweepstakes, or you just won the December prize for something, you can block those texts coming in. It's just you have to go in and look to say block this call or block these types of things. But you can do that within the operating system itself.
Brian, I think I actually asked you this question last night. Is there a password manager program that you'd recommend?
Yes, I don't because we're here and I used to try. It's one that I use, and I'll remind everybody the name of it. It's called 1Password, and you can download it onto your iPhone or you can download it onto your Mac. And really, what it does is it's a good password manager. So listen, I used to tell people not to write down their passwords, and that was kind of the dumbest thing we did. Because it went from having like 4 passwords to sometimes now you have like 5,000 passwords. So what this tool does is it actually keeps your passwords in it. You put it in there with your username and your password in the site, and it actually keeps it protected so that you can use it from there. But it's a great way to keep all those passwords. I actually use it to keep my social security numbers, passports, bank account numbers, and I keep it all in there to keep it secure. And it's called 1Password. You can find it on the App Store.
You did recommend that we shut down our devices. How often should we do so?
From my perspective, when we're doing updates, we actually have a rule in our company that you have to shut it down every 24 hours. I would just recommend that, every 3 days or so at the latest, shut it down. And part of that too, for the reason I tell you to shut it down, is when your computer's running all the time, it's collecting data in your RAM memory and in your cache. What that does is it clears that out. So it really does 2 purposes. One, it clears out the random memory that you have, and it will also actually look for updates as you boot up again and go through that. So, it's always a good thing to be doing that from that perspective.
And Brian, that applies to both your desktop as well as your phones?
You don't have to worry from an iPad or an iPhone. You don't have to worry about that so much. The only reason why I tell people to turn off the iPhones from time to time, It just resets things and clears it, but that's more important about getting the updates, and doing that. So, from a phone, I recommend that probably once every 10 days or so, just to check what that is. The laptops are more there just because you use them more, or your desktop. That's where you create a lot of I call cyber junk, in the sense that the packets and fragments, it all builds up everything. It's same reason why you clean your pipes in the house sometimes. The computers are no different.
Good. What about when a site asks you to accept cookies? Should you do so?
Well, that's a great question right now. There's actually, you're going to see a lot more of that around cookies. What I am going to ask you to do is to get really, really discriminate and stop and pause when that comes out. For the longest time, it sort of was very binary in what it is, but based on some of the new laws, particularly laws in Europe that are forcing coming over here, and you're allowed to opt out of different types of cookies. So let's talk about what cookies are. There are some cookies that do tracking. There are some cookies that you need because they allow you to connect between your computer and the server that's presenting that. So you sort of need those ones. There's other ones, cookies, that they use to talk about where you clicked on it, and they send it for marketing data and all that type of stuff. So what you want to be able to do, what you should see on some really good websites, it'll say now, accept all cookies. And I don't do that, but it says to the ones, it asks you to go, which cookies do you want to accept? And the ones that you typically would go in there is then the ones that say mandatory to use the site. You need to kind of click on those. The rest of them, you don't need to do. Okay, but it should be very explicit on that. And if they don't give you that option, I would try, the first thing I would do is say no, to not accept cookies. And if the site doesn't work and you can't get there, then if you really want to get to that site, relog back in again. And if it's that important, then you'll have to accept the cookies. But some cookies are needed just so you can interact with the site. Other ones are used to track and do things.
You did say or discourage us from saving our credit card information on our computers. Is that still the case for sites where you make reoccurring payments like utility companies and streaming services?
Yeah. So what I would, there's two areas I want you to be cautious with. One of the areas is that in your browser will say, would you like me to save your credit card? Okay. No, you don't want it to do that. Because the browsers, browsers are susceptible, whether you're using Mosaic, whether you're using Google, everything else. Have your credit card with you and type it in. Take the extra step is my recommendation. Now, when you do have to give your credit card though over to, say, a company to pay, for if it's a recurring payment, and you enter it into the site of, say, your gas company, or whether it's Verizon or Comcast, that's okay if you're entering into that site and they're holding on to it. That's okay. They have an obligation to protect your credit card. It's just when you're surfing and doing other things where it says, hey, I'll hold it so I can help you speed up your purchase next time. I just don't recommend that.
What about saving your credit card information on your Apple computer? And then also your iPhone tends to automatically save your information.
Yeah, try to avoid that happening. I know the iPhone's trying to help you be convenient and friendly, but when you get asked to do that, just decline to do it, to have it saved. I think the thing that I'm just going to constantly recommend at this time, and hold your credit card with you, keep it, handle it, try not to put it in other places it shouldn't be. It's just that those things get stolen so easily, and then it becomes a real pain to have to call people and do that. My recommendation again is to just have your card, keep it with you, and when you purchase and do things, it just saves some heartache in a lot of those other areas. And now, well, I guess I say this one: one extra ounce of work will save a lot of heartburn and heartache and other issues later. And I know it's just an extra step, but sometimes it's worth it.
Well, on the other end of that spectrum, Deborah asked, isn't it the safest course to just never make purchases online and never do banking online?
Oh, no, I think it's, I think, one of the things I like about, doing my banking online or sometimes making purchases, it is relatively safe if you do the right things, right? And part of the right things is just, you want to make sure you're going to secure sites. You want to make sure you're going to known sites. And then you use those strong passwords. So every time, if you just do those couple of things, you're okay. And then the other thing I do is you use one credit card when you're making your purchase. Don't use multiple credit cards, just use one, and that's your internet credit card. And that's what you use when you're using it online and do it. And why is that important? Because it really minimizes that if you use 3 or 4 separate ones, and they all get converted, you don't know, then you got a problem. So I'm very pushed about, I use one credit card to purchase things online. I kind of know where it is and I know what happened with it. And then again, if I have to get it re-upped, it's not a big deal, and I'm only $50 out.
Yeah, that makes sense. John asks, is cellular data more secure than hotel Wi-Fi where they give you a password to use?
Yeah, hotel Wi-Fi is always a tricky situation. I'll say this much. I would treat that as the public internet. It's not really more secure. I use VPN in hotels. I actually use VPN on my iPads and my iPhone as well. It's again, as long as you're not buying things online, I just don't recommend buying things online. Surfing online, getting your email is typically fine. But again, it's the, when you go to a hotel and you're doing something like that, it's the equivalent of going into Starbucks, that's my perspective. Password or not, it's irrelevant.
Okay, that's good to know. How can you tell if there's spyware in your system?
It's not always easy on iPhones and everything else. What you'll find is when you run your antivirus and malware, it'll pick it up. It will tell you that it's spyware, and it'll ask to quarantine it or do something. So that's why I encourage people to sort of run their antivirus, periodically, or having it turned on. So when you go into your laptop or you go into your desktop, you'll sort of see that happening. You don't run into it as much on mobile devices. They tend not to have as many issues that, but on your laptops and on your desktops, they will. So run the antivirus like we talked about, and when it gives you, it'll give you a pop-up and tell you what things to do. Follow those directions.
Okay. And speaking of antivirus, do you have any that you'd recommend?
I do. There's a couple I do recommend. I'm a big fan of Symantec. They're tried and true out there. I've used them for a long time. They're very consistent. Microsoft, if you use Microsoft, Microsoft has its antivirus in the operating system of Windows 10. And I recommend just using that integrated antivirus. It's very good. I work with it a lot in our company and around the world. The other one that I find that's pretty reputable is called McAfee. And sometimes McAfee is one that I see a lot of times with telecommunication providers. So I know with Verizon, if you do that, they actually include McAfee in their routers and things like that. So those are the big three from what I call a more not so much a commercial, but a consumer-based ones that are very reputable. You can't go wrong. My perspective, you can't go wrong with Symantec.
And then Brian, can you actually direct us to where to find adware on our computers?
When you're doing adware as well, that's something that you'll pick up. You'll pick up through the antivirus. It picks up spyware, it picks up adware, and it'll let you know that's what it is. If you want to go down that, we can go down and we can run a couple tools and do that, but it just doesn't always sit in one place. Sometimes it's sucked into a browser, sometimes it lands on your hard drive, sometimes it's in your temporary drive. that's why I encourage you to use those type of antivirus scanners, because they're usually pretty thorough in what they go through.
Okay.
And
Well,
also when you're doing that, the reason you run the antivirus though is that it needs to update. Antivirus works on things called signatures. So what it does is it looks for codes, things that gives it indications that this is what we've seen in viruses. So it's always important to update your antivirus. So go into it, and it says it'll ask you where you can update. Please update the DAT file, because it downloads the latest and greatest signatures to do the scan for these different things. So again, you know, find a family friend, neighbor, all that type of stuff. They can actually work on that. If you don't know what to do, please reach out and work on that. It's just that's probably one of the best things you can do to really protect your laptops and your desktops.
and then what's your opinion of AVG for security protection?
AVG.
Deborah, this is your question. If you wouldn't mind clarifying, unmuting yourself and clarifying, that might be helpful.
Gosh, I think I've got that right. AVG.
Is it a company?
As far as I know, it's a company. It's what my my computer consultant put on for me.
As an antivirus?
Yeah, well, it's got a tune-up, and it's got a security which scans for stuff, for viruses and stuff.
Usually if a consultant's recommended, it's probably not that bad. I think, you know, it's good to know that too. A lot of times what you'll find in your tools, like I talked about one called Integro. It does the same thing, where it goes and it scans through your memory, scans through things, cleans up fragmented files, and on top of it, it actually scans for viruses and malware at the same time. So, you know, sometimes when you get that all in one package, that's pretty good too. So yeah, and usually if you get one from your companies, most of my people in my profession usually don't give products out that they don't use themselves sometimes, because they actually want to keep their clients.
And with that, I think we're going to conclude. We're about 18 minutes over. Brian, so generous of you to spend your time and expertise in informing us all on how to be a little more confident in doing what we need to do on the internet. Again, as a reminder, we will send out a link to this recording, as well as some additional resources that Brian referenced in the email to all of those of you who have RSVP. And with that said, good night, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And again, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you all for attending. I appreciate it.